She wasn't looking for history, just a quiet corner of an overgrown naval scrapyard to strip for parts. But when Riley Cade stumbled across the rusted nose of what looked like a World War II-era aircraft embedded in the jungle floor, she had no idea she'd be uncovering a machine decades ahead of its time. What she found inside its corroded shell rewrote everything we thought we knew about wartime innovation and about one engineer whose genius was buried beneath moss, metal, and military secrets. Before we dive in, let us know where in the world you're watching from, and if you love stories where forgotten tech meets unstoppable women, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's episode dives even deeper into what Riley found behind the sealed cockpit door, and trust me, it's not what you're expecting. The road ended where the vines began. Riley Cade stood at the edge of a cracked asphalt path, jungle pressing in from all sides, the humidity clinging to her like second skin. Behind her, the dust-covered Jeep wheezed as it cooled, its exhaust cutting through the still, green silence. In front of her, nothing but a thicket of undergrowth, and a feeling she couldn't shake. Not dread exactly, something closer to anticipation. Like the earth was holding its breath. She unfolded the faded military map one more time, tracing the inked grid lines with her thumb. A red X had been drawn in shaky pen, right on the edge of a gray zone labeled Auxiliary Testing Facility, Site 12. No one had spoken that name in decades, and if not for the map she'd found in the glove box of a salvaged Navy truck back in Pensacola, she wouldn't have either. She pushed forward. Every step deeper into the jungle made her boots feel heavier. Trees loomed thick and tall, their trunks coated in moss and their roots twisting like sleeping snakes. Her shoulder brushed against dangling vines, and somewhere above, a bird let out a call that sounded more like a warning than a greeting. But she didn't turn back. She'd worked too hard, scrapped too long, to ignore a lead like this. After an hour of bushwhacking, something sharp caught the light. At first, she thought it was just scrap, maybe a chunk of fuselage torn off and tossed by the wind of time. But as she cleared more of the brush, her breath hitched. The metal wasn't just a panel. It curved, smooth and deliberate, rising from the jungle floor like the tip of a buried submarine. Vines hung across its surface like curtains. A porthole, rimmed in rust but unbroken, stared back at her like a closed eye. She took a step closer, then another. It wasn't a building. It wasn't a hangar. It was a plane, or at least what was left of one. A massive nose section, maybe 30 feet long, half swallowed by earth and silence. It was unlike anything she'd ever seen, bulky, armored, industrial in design, but with shapes that didn't match any wartime aircraft she knew. She circled it slowly, running a hand along the corroded exterior, her fingers picking up flakes of moss and age. Near what might have once been the cockpit, a symbol was barely visible beneath grime. An eagle, wings spread, stamped over a series of numbers that had long since faded, and just below that, a set of welded rivets that looked newer, out of place, like someone had sealed it from the outside. Her heart kicked in her chest. She wasn't just standing in front of a lost aircraft. She was standing at the edge of a secret someone had gone out of their way to hide. And Riley Cade wasn't leaving until she opened it. The silence pressed in thicker than the air. Riley crouched beside the buried aircraft, her gloved hand tracing the edges of the sealed seam near the cockpit. The weld was clean, too clean. Not something time or crash damage would have caused. Whoever had closed this up had done it on purpose, and they didn't want anyone getting back inside. She sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her arm. The jungle buzzed quietly around her low drones of insects, the rustle of something moving in the trees. Her backpack sat a few feet away, half-zipped, with a worn pry bar sticking out the top. She grabbed it. As the metal clinked against the hull, a soft echo rang out, hollow beneath the surface. This thing wasn't just metal over dirt. It was resting on a cavity. A full fuselage maybe. A cockpit. Possibly more. She worked methodically, peeling back layers of moss and vines. Beneath them, a dull olive paint emerged in patches, flaking away at her touch. Her fingers paused over something stenciled in faded white. XPT-114. She didn't recognize the designation. Riley knew her aircraft had grown up on schematics and scrapyard manuals, more comfortable with torque specs than textbooks. But this code, it wasn't in any warbird archive she'd ever seen. That made her stomach twist in a good way. She stepped back and took in the scene, This was no ordinary crash. There was no debris field, no blast radius. The trees surrounding the aircraft had grown tall and close, their trunks wrapping around the fuselage like nature itself had tried to erase it. Which meant it had been here for a long time intact, unmoved. She set up her portable work light, propped it up on a moss-covered ammo crate she'd found half buried nearby. As the beam cut through the green haze, the aircraft's contours became more defined. It was ugly, brutalist, even. Unlike the sleek, curved designs of the 1940s, this thing looked modular, functional, designed for utility, not elegance. It reminded her of the kind of ship you build when you're trying something for the first time, experimental, risky, raw, and it was still sealed. She found what looked like an access panel halfway down the port side, recessed and rusted over. The locking mechanism was a simple twist bolt, but fused from decades of decay. She jammed the pry bar into the edge and leaned her weight into it. The metal groaned, reluctant. Then, with a pop, it gave. A burst of foul, musty air rushed out, carrying with it the sharp, bitter scent of long-trapped fuel and age. Riley reeled back, coughing. But her eyes never left the opening. She switched on her headlamp and peered inside. Metal catwalks, thick cables, a control console, dust-caked but intact, and mounted on the far wall, something she didn't expect, a glowing green indicator light, still faintly pulsing in the dark. Her breath caught. Power. After all these years. That light meant one thing. Something inside was still alive. The light pulsed once, then again. It was faint, like the heartbeat of a sleeping beast. Riley stared, motionless, one hand still gripping the pry bar, the other resting against the warm edge of the panel. Warm. That registered slowly. The metal should have been cool in this shaded, damp jungle, but it wasn't. Some system, some power source buried within was still running. Not at full capacity, maybe, but alive enough to defy rust and time. She stepped back, breath shallow. Every instinct told her to stop. That whatever this was, it had stayed buried for a reason. But she hadn't come all this way to turn back now. Riley reached for her cutting tools. The portable plasma saw sparked to life with a sharp whine. She steadied it against the sealed cockpit hatch, an oval-shaped doorway rimmed with thick, bolted steel. Unlike the access panel, this wasn't just welded shut. It had been reinforced, patched over. Someone really didn't want it opened. But that was a challenge Riley had never been able to walk away from. The blade bit into the metal, glowing red as it carved through layers of steel and secrecy. Sparks flared, bouncing off the jungle walls. Steam hissed up from the ground as the heat met the moist air. She worked in slow arcs, cutting a window into the forgotten past. It took nearly an hour. When the last bolt fell, the hatch groaned and dropped, inward, slamming hard against the floor inside. Dust billowed out, choking the air. Riley waved it away and shone her headlamp forward. The cockpit was stunning, not in a clean, pristine kind of way, but in its complexity. Dual control sticks, but no yoke. Dozens of toggles, many labeled in codes she didn't understand. A panel of analog gauges sat beside a row of something that looked suspiciously like early magnetic data reels. Most astonishing of all was the main console centered on the dash like a heartbeat. Behind a cracked plexiglass shield sat a cylindrical module, dark gray, with 3 colored wires feeding into it, red, black, and a glowing green. She stepped inside carefully. The floor groaned beneath her boots but held. She took in the smell oil, ozone, the faint metallic sting of insulation burned long ago. Her fingers hovered over the controls, not touching, just memorizing. A few dials still ticked slowly, stubbornly. One of them read internal core temp. 38 degrees Celsius. That was impossible. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't dead. And it definitely wasn't from any textbook version of 1940s aircraft. She spotted a clipboard jammed between the seat cushions. Water warped and yellowed, but still intact. Her gloved hands trembled slightly as she opened it. At the top of the first page, typed in sharp black ink, XPT-114, Internal Propulsion Test Confidential Clearance, only E.V. Dalton. Her breath caught. That name again. Dalton wasn't just some name on a blueprint. Dalton had been here. In this seat. In this plane. And whatever they built, it wasn't just forgotten, it had been hidden. The name echoed in her mind like a dropped wrench in an empty hangar. E.V. Dalton. She said it out loud, softly, as if speaking it might conjure someone from the shadows. The cockpit stayed silent, except for the soft tick, tick, tick of the one gauge that refused to die. Riley flipped through the clipboard pages slowly. They were brittle with age, but the ink had held. Schematics, system diagrams, heat tolerance tables, all written in a combination of standard military notation and hand-pen notes that bordered on obsessive. Margins filled with formulas, side thoughts, redesigns. Whoever Dalton was, they hadn't just built this, they breathed it. At the bottom of every page was a stamped insignia, property of USN Black Vault Project, do not duplicate. Her stomach turned. Black Vault. She'd only heard that name once before, whispered at a veteran's swap meet by a retired machinist who claimed he'd seen things with no right to fly. Most thought it was folklore, a catch-all name for top-secret wartime prototypes that never made it out of testing. But this wasn't rumor, this was real. She pulled herself out of the cockpit and dropped to the jungle floor, legs slightly unsteady beneath her. The air was thick, soupy. The light was beginning to dim. Afternoon shadows stretched long between the trees. She needed to document everything, before anyone else found it, before someone took it away. Back at her Jeep, she pulled out her old DSLR and tripod still crusted with dust from the last desert shoot. She snapped shots of the cockpit, the console, the data core, the name on the schematics. Everything. If anyone tried to silence this, they'd have to erase every byte she saved. As the sun dipped behind the canopy, she returned to the aircraft and found something she hadn't noticed before. Etched into the side of the pilot's seat, barely visible beneath a layer of grime and rust, were 3 lines. Dalton, E. Leave no ghosts. It was never just a plane. She read it again, slower. Leave no ghosts. What had Dalton been running from? Or trying to preserve? The journal hadn't mentioned a co-pilot. The second seat had been empty, dust undisturbed. But the plane was clearly built for 2. Why? She climbed back in and traced her fingers along the dash, beneath the gauges, looking for anything else, another name, another clue. And there, just under the lower console, taped and sealed in waxed canvas, was a small pouch. Inside, 3 black and white photographs, folded carefully. One showed 2 men standing in front of the aircraft mid-construction, one tall, one shorter, face obscured by glare. Another showed blueprints laid out on a hangar floor. The third? A close-up of a strange cylindrical core device. The same one still humming behind her. On the back of the photo was a handwritten note. If this reaches someone, finish what they buried. E. Riley stared at the words, the initials. This wasn't just an aircraft. It was a mission someone died trying to protect. And now, it was hers. The humming never stopped. Even as the jungle grew dark around her, the faint thrum of energy inside the cockpit was constant low, steady, like a sleeping heart. Riley had tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself it was just a trick of residual charge, maybe some battery that hadn't fully drained after all these years. But she knew better. No conventional power source would have lasted this long, certainly not in these conditions. She returned to the aircraft just after dawn, the sky still streaked with pink and gold. She hadn't slept much. The photos haunted her, the inscription on the seat even more so. It was never just a plane, that phrase clung to her like mist. With the rising light, she approached the console again, tools in hand. The containment pod behind the cracked plexiglass shield had no visible fasteners. No screws, no brackets. Just those 3 wires, red, black, green feeding into its side. The green one glowed softly at the base, pulsing like breath. She reached for her voltmeter and carefully tested the outer casing. 42 volts. Riley sat back, stunned. That wasn't residual. That was generation. She switched tactics, pulled out her infrared thermometer, and pointed it at the pod's surface. 38 degrees Celsius. Same as yesterday. Warm, stable, and consistent. It was alive. Not just figuratively, functionally. It was still doing something. But what? She needed help. Back in her garage, She had a bench full of disassembled relics and half-broken dreams. But she also had a name, Don Heller. Retired Navy avionics specialist, now running a small repair shop 2 counties over. He'd spent his life dissecting military tech from every era, and more importantly, he had no love for red tape. She snapped a dozen photos of the pod and the glowing wires, took close-ups of the inscription and the hand-typed logs in the clipboard. Then, hesitating only a moment, she texted him, "Don, I found something. Black vault level. Not a joke. Need your eyes." A minute passed. Then 2. Then his reply, "You better not be screwing with me, Cade." She sent the photos. Waited. He called within 30 seconds. "Where the hell did you get these?" His voice was gruff, tight, not angry, worried. "A forgotten test site," she said. "Aircraft. Designation XPT-114. Ever heard of it?" A long pause. "No, and that's what's got me spooked." "You recognize the device?" "Not exactly. But I've seen parts of it before in classified diagrams. Experimental thermal energy reactors. Small ones. Most didn't make it past the drawing board. But this one's on." Another pause. "If that thing's still active, Cade, then it's not just forgotten tech. It's suppressed. And if it was Black Vault, you may not be the only one who knows it's running again." Riley's mouth went dry. "I need you to come see it," she said. "Now." Don exhaled sharply. "Send me coordinates. And Cade, don't touch anything else. Not until I get there." She nodded, though he couldn't see her, because deep down, she already had. And something inside that pod had noticed. The jungle felt different the next morning. Quieter. Riley noticed it the second she stepped from the jeep. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just a strange stillness, like the world was watching and waiting. Don was already there, crouched near the fuselage in his grease-stained coveralls, his duffel bag of tools open beside him. He looked up as she approached, eyes shaded under his worn cap, expression unreadable. "You weren't exaggerating," he said. Riley gave a grim nod. "No one's been out here in decades. And yet?" She pointed toward the cockpit. Don stood slowly and stepped inside, ducking under the low frame. She watched his eyes move over the controls, the pod, the gauges still ticking. He didn't speak for a long time. "This is military," he finally murmured. "But not standard issue. They don't make equipment like this, not even today." "It's signed by E.V. Dalton," Riley said. "I think he was the designer. Possibly the pilot." Don turned, startled. "Dalton? You're sure?" She pulled out the clipboard, flipping to the first page. He took it, studied the type, then the margin notes, his brow tightening. "I've seen this handwriting before. Years ago, on a set of copied diagrams that never officially existed." He tapped a finger against the corner of the page. Dalton was brilliant. A ghost in the Navy's research records. Some say he was removed from the books after the war. Made something too powerful. Something they didn't want replicated. Riley swallowed. "I think this is it." Don didn't argue. Later that day, as the two of them worked to gently unbolt a sealed compartment behind the cockpit bulkhead, something shifted, a soft click. Riley reached into the narrow gap, her hand brushing against a rusted handle. She pulled. A drawer slid free, and inside was a weathered metal box, 6 inches wide, locked with a brittle leather strap and a brass clasp. She opened it. Letters. At least 24, stacked neatly and bound with twine. She picked one up, the envelope yellowed. But the writing, still legible, block letters, careful strokes. It was addressed simply, "To whomever finds this, please, read it all." Don stood behind her, silent. Riley broke the seal and unfolded the page. "My name is Elias Vernon Dalton. If you found this aircraft, then they failed to erase me completely. This machine, XPT-114, was my final project before I disappeared from public records. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. It was built to save lives. That's what they told me. But I know better now. They wanted the Corps for something else. They wanted war without limits. So I sealed it, buried it, and left this behind, hoping that someday someone with more courage or desperation would find it again. Someone like you. If you're reading this, finish what I couldn't, and be careful. It still listens. Riley's hands shook as she folded the letter back up. Dawn looked pale. What does he mean? It listens. She didn't know. But she had the sudden, sinking feeling that she was no longer the one doing the discovering. Something deep inside the machine had been waiting for her. The hum had changed. It was subtle, too subtle, for most to notice, but Riley felt it deep in her chest. It wasn't louder, it was aware. Like the core inside the aircraft had sensed her reading Dalton's letter and was adjusting itself in response. A shift in rhythm, a change in pulse. Dawn didn't say it aloud, but he felt it too. He kept glancing at the pod now, not out of curiosity, but out of concern. Back at the garage, Riley cleared the back bay and laid out every photo, letter, and schematic they had found. The space that once smelled of diesel and rust now carried something heavier, like the weight of history pressing down. Dawn leaned over the workbench, tracing a trembling finger along a page labeled Thermal Pulse Containment Unit Rev 6. His mouth worked soundlessly as he read. This isn't theoretical anymore, he finally said. Riley, what you've got here, it's not just a relic. This tech wasn't supposed to exist. She nodded slowly. That pod, it's self-stabilizing. Still warm, still powered, still running after 80 years. The internal temp hasn't shifted a single degree in 3 days. Don muttered something under his breath. Something about military contracts, buried patents, and propulsion systems that got too close to perpetual operation. But Riley wasn't listening anymore. She had pulled up the scan of Dalton's photo, the one showing the strange reactor unit mid-construction. Zoomed in, she could now see something she'd missed before. A chalkboard in the background, covered in formulas and notes. She enhanced the image. In the bottom corner of the board, nearly cut off by the photo's edge, were 5 words written in bold, underlined chalk. Do not duplicate, not stable. Her blood ran cold. This thing, this beautiful, impossible piece of tech, had never been completed, never been tested beyond prototype. Yet, it had endured. What else was it capable of? That night, Riley couldn't sleep. She sat alone in the garage, lit only by the glow of her laptop screen and the soft buzz of overhead fluorescence. The letters were all spread out before her, and she'd started piecing together a timeline. Dalton had worked under a classified Navy division sometime in early 1943. His writing was precise, sometimes cold, but cracks appeared in the later pages: tension, fear, doubt. In one note, he'd written, "They want to install it in a test vessel by December. I told them the shielding isn't ready. They told me I didn't understand the urgency." In another, "I buried the secondary core near the site. They can't build without it. Not safely." She stared at that line for a long time. There was more. A second core. Still out there. And Dalton had hidden it. Riley pushed back from the desk and stood slowly, her reflection caught in the shop window dark. Eyes, grease-streaked cheeks, a 1,000-yard stare that hadn't been there a week ago. This was bigger than tech, bigger than history. She was standing in the middle of a cover-up, with an unstable prototype quietly purring in the wreckage and a second piece of the puzzle still buried somewhere in the jungle. It wasn't just a discovery anymore. It was a race. The first sign was subtle, a tire track fresh carved deep into the soft mud just off the jungle path. Riley hadn't noticed it when she drove in. But now, with the sun setting low and orange across the treetops, it stood out like a warning. Her Jeep was the only vehicle that should have been out here. No one else had the coordinates. Except Don. She called him. Straight to voicemail. The pit in her stomach grew deeper. Back at the aircraft site, the air felt different again. Not just silent, but watched. The thick jungle pressed closer. The shadows, longer. Her fingers brushed the hilt of her folding knife on instinct, even though she knew it wouldn't help against whoever or whatever might be out here now. She ducked into the fuselage. The cockpit was just as she left it. The pod still glowed softly. The letters, tucked in a lockbox she'd bolted under the pilot's seat. But the pressure panel in the floor creaked under her step. Too much give. She crouched and pried it up. Someone had been here. Recently. A single footprint in the dust. Larger than hers. Heavy-soled boot. Military issue. Her hands trembled as she replaced the panel and backed out of the aircraft, eyes scanning the tree line. That night, she didn't go home. She stayed at the garage, locked every door, loaded a revolver. Her grandfather left her under the cash drawer. The letters were stashed in a safe she hadn't opened in years. The photos, backed up to 3 hard drives, one of which she mailed to an anonymous P.O. box, she'd set up just in case this moment ever came. At 2:43 a.m., she woke to headlights in the distance. Not on the road. In the woods. No engine sound. Just the eerie silence of electric movement. A black SUV crept past the edge of her property. Lights off, gliding slow. She stayed crouched behind her shop desk, breath shallow, heart thudding so loud she thought it might betray her. It didn't stop. Not that time. But it came back the next night. And the next. Dawn still hadn't returned her calls. On the 4th morning, a package arrived. No sender. Just her name, handwritten, on the front. Inside, a flash drive. And a note. I'm sorry. I couldn't protect it all. You have to finish it now. D. Her hands shook as she slid the flash drive into her laptop. It contained one file. A single video clip. The timestamp read 3:12 a.m. The footage, grainy and black and white, showed a nighttime shot of the jungle test site. The aircraft, barely visible in the frame. Then, movement. 2 figures in tactical gear. No insignia. One carried a heavy case. The other, a pry bar. They entered the aircraft. Seconds later, the green pulse on the core flared brighter than Riley had ever seen it. Then the video cut to static. She stared at the screen, frozen. The implications were clear. They didn't want to discover the prototype. They wanted to activate it. And Riley? She was running out of time. The map was torn and water-stained, but the red X still bled through. She found it in the bottom of Don's package, folded between backup schematics and his personal field notes. Not the original copy Dalton had drawn, but a rough recreation, hand-sketched, marked with shaking hands. In Don's scribbled handwriting were 3 words: Second Corps buried. The location was 5 miles west of the original site, nestled deep in a valley with no roads, no structures, and according to official military topography, nothing of note. But Riley trusted it, because Don had died for this. Or disappeared trying to. She left before sunrise, taking only what she needed: flashlights, rope, gear, her camera, and the revolver. The air was heavy, the jungle loud, the pressure building behind her ribs, with every step deeper into the green. After hours of climbing and cutting through overgrowth, she found it. At first it looked like a collapsed fuel tank, rusted and sunken into the earth, choked with vines. But as she cleared the base, her breath hitched. Not 1 aircraft. 2. The second was smaller, sleeker. A test body, maybe a stripped-down prototype for stress testing or field deployment. Unlike the first, this one was missing its outer paneling in several places, exposing a thick internal network of wires and framework. But in the center of the floor was a circular mount, empty. A perfect fit for a reactor core. Her fingers brushed the edges of the mount. Burn marks. Warped steel. It had been activated once. She climbed deeper inside, boots echoing softly against the hollow chamber. The silence was uncanny, like sound itself didn't want to linger here. On the far wall, something caught her eye. A metal panel bolted shut, barely holding against the corrosion. She pried it loose with a screwdriver, and behind it was a weather-sealed bag. Inside were Dalton's final notes. If you've come this far, you've found them both. I don't know how, I don't know when. But if you're reading this, then the systems are waking up. I designed the prototype to self-regulate, but it wasn't ready. The energy output doubled in the final test. That's why I buried the second one. Because the moment you install them together, it becomes something else. Something we weren't meant to finish. Riley stared at the words, throat dry. Dalton hadn't just hidden the core to keep it safe. He'd hidden it because he was afraid. She turned back toward the cockpit wall, now just a shell of tangled cables and forgotten purpose. And that's when she saw it. Scorched fingerprints on the console. Fresh. Someone had been here. Recently. Someone else knew. Her head snapped up. A distant crunch. Footsteps in the brush outside. Slow. Deliberate. She shut off her flashlight, pressed herself into the shadows. Through a gap in the fuselage, she saw them. 2 figures. Dark uniforms. Tactical gear. No insignias. They weren't searching anymore. They were recovering. She slipped out the back, careful not to break a branch, her body tight with adrenaline. Whatever was going on, it wasn't about restoration. It was about containment. Or worse, reconstruction. She had one last chance to stop it, and it meant exposing everything. Riley didn't go home. She didn't even go back to the garage. She drove straight to the old ranger station abandoned for years, but still tall enough to give her a signal. At the top of the rusted tower, she pulled out her laptop, connected to the mobile hotspot tucked inside her gear bag, and opened the folder labeled Dalton Legacy. Inside were the scans, the schematics, the letters, the activation footage, the second core site, everything. She uploaded them to 3 servers, including one tied to an anonymous data drop, run by military transparency watchdogs. Within minutes, the files were syncing, distributing, duplicating across the web. Some would be flagged, some might get pulled. But not all. It was too late to erase. The world would know. By the time the files hit public feeds, she was already miles away. Moving. Untraceable. The first story ran 12 hours later. Mechanic uncovers lost World War II tech that could redefine energy history. Then came the avalanche. Podcasts, live streams, interviews with military historians she'd never met. Online forums flooded with debate. Was it real? Was it a hoax? Who was E.V. Dalton? And then came the statement from the Navy. Carefully worded, tactfully vague. They acknowledged a previously classified prototype effort during the war and confirmed an unauthorized excavation near an old Florida test site, but denied any knowledge of active systems or missing personnel. They were trying to contain the story, but they were too late. Because Riley Cade had become the story. She didn't go on camera, didn't take interviews. But the people who followed her, work mechanics, restoration crews, underdog engineers, they knew. They recognized the woman behind the gloves and grease. They saw what she saw. That this was never about treasure. It was about truth. Weeks later, someone anonymously uploaded a second clip. Grainy footage, black and white. A young man, early 40 tech, in a hangar. Lean frame, lab coat, nervous eyes. It was Dalton. If you're watching this, I failed to keep it hidden. But maybe someone stronger came after me. Someone who knows not everything powerful needs to be used. Something should remain possible, but untouched. If you finish my work, don't let them call it progress. Make it mean something else. The video ended with coordinates. The same valley Riley had already found. Dalton had left her one final choice. Weeks passed. She returned to the jungle one last time alone. The second prototype was still there. The tactical crew hadn't found it, or hadn't needed to. She stood inside its hollow shell, looking at the place where the core once Saturday, a quiet space that now felt like a memorial. She didn't touch anything, didn't take anything. Instead, she knelt and carved something small into the frame beneath the pilot's seat, just initials. R, C, E, V. D. Legacy, passed forward. Back home, the garage was still standing, dustier, quieter, but alive. The world moved on, but something had changed. Every so often she'd get a letter. From a student who chose engineering because of her story. From a veteran who remembered Dalton's name. From a girl who watched her interviews, then started fixing her own bike. The world would remember E.V. Dalton. But it would remember Riley Cade too. Not for the secret she uncovered, but for the truth she refused to bury.